Welcome to live interaction with global change makers. Today we have with us a very seasoned professional and a very tall leader, woman tall leader in CSR and sustainability with an experience of more than 4 decades approximately. She has climbed up the ladder and still she is working in the space of CSR, sustainability, research and development. I'd like to welcome Ms. Neelima Khetan. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Harsha. My pleasure.
It's an honor to have you with us. We would like to, it's close to 4 decades of experience in developing India with your work. How has it been and what could be better?
So thank you very much, Harsha. And of course, 4 decades, I think, as you said, almost 4 decades. And I think it's been I've seen the sector through its ups and downs, and some of the best periods of the social sector I have been blessed to be part of, and also some of the new developments that are constantly having. I'm also very blessed to be now witnessing those. So yeah, overall, if I look back, very satisfied and wonderful time it has been.
So when you started your journey, what were the social challenges, and now what are the social challenges? What could have been better?
So maybe, Harsha, I will. So the social challenges, of course, I think they keep changing from time to time. But I will maybe take a couple of minutes to talk more about the topic on which we were going to speak on, which is about looking at just one dimension of change which has taken place over these 4 decades, which is around CSR and sustainability, and how that has changed in the Indian context, and of course, maybe also globally, because in today's world, none of us are disconnected from what happens in the larger global area. So let me reflect a little bit on what is this space of CSR and sustainability, and how has that changed in particular. So actually, if you go back, I would say in the Indian context, at least, corporate philanthropy, or CSR as we call it now, is not something that is new. Even from the pre-independence times, we've had stalwarts like the Tata families or the Birlas, the Bajajes, all of these people who have given most generously for development, for the pre-independence movement and other things. And there is a very famous quote by Jamshedji Tata, which is, I think he said it more than 100 years ago, where he said that, and let me read the exact quote, where he said that in a free enterprise, community is not just another stakeholder in business, but in fact, it is the very purpose of its existence, which is a very revolutionary statement. If I say that again, Harsha, for a second, that he said that in a free enterprise, community is not just another stakeholder in business, but in fact, it is the very purpose of its existence. So, as I said, it's a very, very radical statement to make 100 years ago. So we had, stalwarts like the Tatas in the corporate philanthropy space, who really looked at corporate philanthropy very differently and then took it forward like this. And then, of course, you had families like the Bajajes and the Birlas, again, who gave very generously. And then some lesser known families also, Harsha, lesser known individuals. One particular individual who comes to my mind is Govindaram Seksaria. I don't know how many people would know about Govindaram Seksaria, but just to give you one point which will tell you how eminent he was, in 1946, he passed away. And when he passed away, his obituary was published by the New York Times. So he's an Indian merchant. And when he passes away, He was also a member of the New York Cotton Exchange since 1934. Very eminent business person, very low key, never in his life gave one interview, but gave so generously across the country for different causes, again, including the independence movement, and education is what he was passionate about. So, point that I'm making is that if we look at the pre-independence times, Harsha, I think we had leading industrialists who believed in CSR and philanthropy or corporate philanthropy in a very, very forward-looking fashion. In fact, close to what I would say what Gandhiji had said at that time, his idea was about trusteeship, which I'm sure most of your audience and everyone is familiar with, where he said that what business should view at the wealth that it creates as a trustee on behalf of society, and my right to a good livelihood is only to the extent which is what the average person in society can afford. So my lifestyle should that's the lifestyle right that I have, not beyond what an average person can afford. So we had that kind of a thinking, I would say from pre-independence, very, very strong role that business and corporates played in the development of the country, in the freedom of the country. Maybe after that, for I would say a couple of decades, then that maybe after independence went a little bit on the back burner, although some of these families that I'm speaking of continued to invest in as institution building. If you see Tata's, the kinds of institutions they have built, even Mr. Govindaram Seksaria that I spoke about, Bajaj, family, others, everyone. But alongside in the West, I would say in the last 55 decades, in the last 50 years, in the last 5 decades, the conversations around corporate philanthropy became more pronounced. And I would say the conversation has been influenced by two strands of thinking. So one strand of thinking in this theoretical kind of debates around corporate philanthropy. So one strand, you can call it, which is based on, let's say, the agency theory. Now, this is something that Friedman spoke about in 1970s, where he's, in his point of view, according to him, philanthropy can never be decided by an institution or by an organization, and it is something which is an individual decision. So it's my decision as to the kind of philanthropy I want to do, and how can an institution or a corporate do philanthropy on my behalf. So in fact, it's a reduction in the profits or dividends that are owed to me if the company does philanthropy on my behalf. So that's kind of one point of view that has informed this conversation around corporate philanthropy. But the other point of view which has emerged around corporate philanthropy, especially I would say in the last 2 decades, more strongly has been what is now more popularly called the shared value approach, which says that business can do well while doing good. And in this approach, the doing good is very closely aligned to the core business of the company. And the idea is that if you do good here, there is some contribution back to business, either through goodwill or through a social license to operate or through brand love or other things. But that's the shared value approach. Of course, the shared value approach is not without its critics. The shared value approach, it says that because in a shared value approach, you will end up focusing on your core business areas, because that's the alignment that you are trying to bring about, which means that you may rank business interests over social interests. So my business interest may lie in the area of, let's say, sports. But social interest at that point of time may not lie in sports, but may lie in health. But I will prioritize sports because I am a sports company, and I will align my social priorities also along with my business priorities. And therefore, people have criticized that the shared value approach may have a limited role in solving social problems. It may have a greater role in furthering business, the doing well through doing good. But whether it will also solve social problems, one does not. People have criticized that. As I was saying, in the last 5 decades, these two perspectives around corporate philanthropy, and you will see many companies even today will keep going between these two. One is, how can we, so the agency approach where how can I decide on behalf of my shareholder? The shareholder will decide, and I can't do charity on behalf of my shareholder or philanthropy. And the other is the shared value approach that the business can benefit through doing this. Again, like I said, both have their criticism. But in this conversation, I think we've lost out on a third perspective, which is a perspective from where we began this conversation, which is the perspective which Gandhiji called trusteeship, or if you take Jamshedji Tata, what he said about that the very reason for the existence of a free enterprise, where he said that the community is not just another stakeholder, but it is in fact the very purpose of its existence. And Gandhiji, in his own words, called it trusteeship. So I feel that somewhere, I think that third approach, which was, or third perspective or a third philosophy about corporate philanthropy, which was a very Indian philosophy or an Indian perspective, I think somewhere that has moved to the margins or faded into the background. And that is something that we need to recover. So I just want to say one more thing, Harsha. Were you raising your hand? Okay. So I'll just close this and I'll say one more thing. So what I said was till now, Harsha, about the development of the corporate philanthropy philosophies or theories, and how people have approached it. I also now want to talk about, so if on this side there is, there is debates and there is arguments and whether it should be done, how it should be done, etc. But then on the other side also, it is not smooth. The other side is the not-for-profit side. And when they enter into these relationships with corporate organizations and corporate philanthropy relationships. So what are these relationships like? And many people have said that these kinds of conversations, so for many people, a question that they ask is that for what purpose would a for-profit company engage in charitable activities? So there is a question mark on the very kind of what is your intent? What is your motivation behind getting into this? There have been questions raised on, do non-profits stand to lose their autonomy when they get into these relationships with for-profit organizations? Then there is also, because for-profit, so there are conversations or questions about trade-offs that happen when non-profits get into these partnerships. There are questions or debates on what you can call the marketization of philanthropy. So corporates, when they get into philanthropy, at least now over the last, I would say, decade or so, a greater emphasis on talking about the philanthropy that they are doing, which was not the case, let's say, 5 decades ago, 6 decades ago, 7 decades ago, when the emphasis was not about talking about the good that you've done, which has now started happening, and what leads to that. I think one mistake that nonprofits make is that they think of corporate philanthropy as the same as philanthropy done by foundations. And we have to understand that there is a fundamental difference between foundations when they partner with nonprofits and corporates when they get into philanthropy. For foundations, philanthropy is their core business. For corporates, philanthropy is not their core business. It is something that they do on the side. Their core business continues to be the main business of the company. And then philanthropy is something that they are doing on on the margins most often, whatever may be the projection of it, but the reality is that it is on the margins. In a shared value approach, maybe you could say it becomes a little more, occupies a bit more of the center space, but still there is an essential difference between these two sets of entities. So let me stop here for the time being, Harsha. Basically, what I'm saying is that I think if we look at the journey of CSR and corporate philanthropy in the Indian context, I think there are two strands that are dominant in the conversations, which is the agency strand or the shared value strand. But I'm saying that there's a third strand, which was an Indian strand of corporate philanthropy, which was trusteeship, or as Jamshedji Tata had put it. But I think that strand needs to be made stronger. It still is strong, maybe in case of some companies, but I feel we need to talk more about that and develop that into a stronger strand. And the second point that I have made, Harsha, is that I think for non-profits, learning to work with corporate philanthropy is a new kind of animal that they need to understand and figure out how these relationships can be made the best of both world relationships, or how these relationships can end up becoming traded off relationships. So I will stop here, Harsha, and yes, I will look forward to questions and taking.
Extremely insightful to hear you, ma'am. So, and very well put across a point, and I completely comprehend with all of them. Now, in the journey that you have led, what human evolution have you witnessed, and the approach of social development? As you mentioned, the NGOs should learn how to work with corporate philanthropy, and there is a vast difference. What is the evolution that you have witnessed?
So in the social space, Harsha, the evolutions that I have seen, and I don't think I would call that evolution in the sense of, evolution is when something, there's an improvement. That's the manner in which we use the term evolution. But I think in the social sector, I won't necessarily call that the phase following was better than the previous phase, but I would say that we've had different phases in which there was emphasis on different things, and but I would say that maybe all of them were important. So what are the evolutionary phases that I would say that I have seen? So I would say that if we look at the initial years of the social sector, there was a lot of emphasis on what Gandhiji, when he started, what he used to call constructive work, which meant, to put it simply, bringing about change through engaging in service or action. So you change through the process of doing. And in his definition of constructive work, if we are talking about building a better society or having more kind of, imbibing values that are more democratic or treating people with equality, that's not something that you do separate from what your actions are. So for him, therefore, let's say in an ashram, why emphasis on doing things yourself or changing through doing? So I'm certainly not an expert on Gandhi, but I'm just saying that there was constructive work, as I understand, was a strand that was a very strong strand in the initial years in India's developmental journey, so to say. And there was also, I would say, then in between a time when there was almost an explosion of innovative ideas and innovative solutions in the Indian social sector, where you just found such a large number of people, well-educated people, who went to different corners of the country, whether that was an organization like Eklavya or SWRC in Tilonia, or Rural University Experiment in Javaja, or even for that matter, Pradhan kinds of organizations, which were just trying to innovate and think about, or Vidushak Karkhana. I can take a lot of names of organizations that just came into this work through the idea of exploring innovations. So that was another phase that we have seen in the India's, in the social development. Another phase that I would say was very, very strong in the 90s and the 2000s was the rights-based work. So whether it was right to education or right to work or right to information, but a lot of emphasis on rights, citizens realizing their rights, getting their rights. So maybe that was another emphasis. And as I said, I don't think these are evolutionary, that, what comes next is better than what has happened before. But I'm just saying that at different times, there has been emphasis on different aspects of development. And the phase that I think we are now in, where I think the emphasis is a lot on, at least what I am witnessing and seeing, I see a lot of, I don't know what is the word to put it, but there is a lot of, because of what we spoke earlier, corporate entry into the development space, whether that's because of CSR or because of people who were earlier in corporate spaces and moved into the non-profit space. I think there is a lot of intermingling of corporate corporate perspectives into the non-profit perspectives, and there is in the conversations and terminologies that you will see a lot of kind of corporatized approaches that are happening. And again, I'm saying that there is no kind of value judgment on whether one is better than the other, but I'm just saying at different times, context changes and emphasis changes.
Ma'am, in your roles as CEO of Seva Mandir, Country Director at AIF, heading Coca-Cola and Vedanta Group CSR, what were the challenges at various executive levels?
So that's a vast question, Harsha. And I think challenges in all these spaces have been very different. But let me just pick two challenges and speak of those two challenges, because otherwise it will be a long half-an-hour conversation on just the challenges. So I would say in Seva Mandir, I would say the Seva Mandir had for itself said that the ends and means must be in alignment. So it is not important to only have the outcomes, but it's equally important that what is the process through which you arrived at that outcome. So Seva Mandir, because its, I think, roots lay in Gandhian thinking, still are in Gandhian thinking. So this combining or bringing close together of ends and means was for Seva Mandir extremely important in whatever it did. And to me, Harsha, that's the hardest part of any change. If you are going to constantly question yourselves on whether your means were as pure as the ends that you are, so if I say that I want to have, let's say, equality in society, then before I begin to work on equality in society, or not before, but alongside my work on equality in society, I also have to keep questioning myself on how much do I embody those values of equality. And that constant spotlight on yourself, also questioning your behavior, your own approaches, your processes, is very hard for most of us. It was hard for Gandhiji also. If you read Experiments with Truth, that unblinking gaze on how you are actually embodying those values can be very, very hard. And for people like us who are very ordinary middle class, lower middle class people that were in Seva Mandir, this constant gaze on, putting yourselves under scrutiny as to whether you were embodying those principles, to me, that was the biggest challenge. And I think that was also the joy, because that sense of purity that you felt, that it's not just that we are going out and doing something. So there's no difference between my life and my work. Whatever is my work is also my life. Whatever is my life is also my work. But it's hard. So I'm just saying that was, I think, the challenge that was always there. When I moved to the for-profit side, when I worked with, let's say, Coca-Cola or with Vedanta, I think the biggest challenge for me then was coming up with the face-to-face with the reality that there is mistrust. There is mistrust on both sides, an equal amount of mistrust. So non-profits do not trust the for-profits, and for-profits do not trust the non-profits. And how do we overcome that mistrust and begin to bring the two together? Because if we don't talk to each other, if we don't understand each other, if we are only going to suspect each other, then there is very little that we are going to achieve together. So I think the biggest challenge in these places has been, how do you create a culture and environment or processes whereby both begin to come together and the mistrust goes down.
Many of the NGOs face this challenge in the times that we are. So what are the CSR projects? We must have executed so many CSR projects till date, even with the NGOs. Which ones are close to your heart, and how do you think they could be replicable by others?
So that is a difficult one, Harsha. Hard to say which one is more special. But let me speak about, like you said, if it can be replicated. So I'll speak about under what conditions did we enjoy those programs, and where did we feel we had maximum impact or added value. So I think there were some projects that I was fortunate to be able to do, in which we kind of co-designed, co-created, and co-learned. So we were able, so there were some programs in which we were able to bring together, let's say, a group of nonprofits to work on the same project. And bringing together a group of nonprofits meant that, let's say, if there were 5 or 4 nonprofits working on the same project, every nonprofit has their own approach and their own way of doing things. And because we were not insisting that it has to be done in only one way, it was always such a joy to see how the same problem could be solved using many different approaches. And then it was also a joy to see different partners begin to question each other and also learn from each other. And also the amount of learning that happened for me and my team rapidly, listening to how nonprofits were doing and the challenges that were coming forward and how they were solving. So maybe what I'm saying doesn't appear anything different, but I'll tell you what was it that was happening. So one, Harsha, we did not go into that program thinking that we knew the answers. We went into the program thinking that here's a problem and we want to figure out, the best answer to this problem. So we went into it with the mindset of learning and listening. and also questioning and challenging. So we were not going to say that, okay, whatever you are saying is all right. We were also going to question and push and challenge. And somehow we were able to create an environment where there was that mutual trust that people could question each other, both sides. Non-profits could question us and we could question the non-profits. Non-profits could give us the pushback and we could give them the pushback. And I think most learning happened in that context. And I think one of the best programs developed out of that, a program that was working in a difficult subject area, which was of early childhood care and malnutrition. It's a difficult area in which to find some change happen. Government was also one of the partners. And yet we were able to accomplish a lot. And if we were able to do that, like I said, it was because we had been able to create an atmosphere in which we were truly working as equals and learning from each other and also challenging each other.
Ma'am, considering the kind of trust challenges that most of them face, what were the criteria when you all engaged with NGOs? Now, I know that even the answer would be very big, but whatever little you could, the commonalities, because you work with all the multinationals, what were the commonalities so that NGOs would know when they are approaching, these are the basics that they need to have in place?
So one thing, Harsha, I feel that I think most corporates look for non-profits that are authentic and that have strong either community connect or subject matter expertise, ideally both. That they know their work, they know the area of work that they are in, and that they are strongly embedded in the communities. That's what corporates look for. Corporates also look for strong processes and systems, because many corporates are fearful of putting money, and suppose the money is not used properly, and if there is negative publicity, then corporates are afraid of negative publicity. So they are looking for corporates where they can trust the systems of governance, of financial management, etc. So basically, I think most corporates are only looking for these two things: that strong systems and a strong kind of understanding and connect in communities. And of course, then I think a little bit it happens is just, a matter of accident. It happens maybe almost, I can say, where you find overlapping geography. So there may be a wonderful nonprofit, but it is working in an area in which you are not working, and therefore you are not able to partner. So geography alignment in some cases also becomes a factor in that decision. But I think the most important, I would also say in some cases, I think communication, your ability to communicate well about what has happened is also a factor. But I would say, because I've also seen organizations, nonprofits, which are investing a lot in just good communication, I would say don't spend so much on just communication. Invest far more on getting the job done. If your communication is not as strong, the corporate partner can also help you make that communication better. But invest in, just as I said, these two things: making sure that your work is solid and making sure that your systems are solid.
So solid work and solid systems.
Yes.
Excellent. So in your current role as partner at NUIS Consultants and visiting fellow at Center for Social and Economic Progress, what are the development sector solutions at risk?
Both are in a sense now they are different, Harsha, and a little bit, both of them are kind of a balcony view to things. So in terms of news consultants, we do work in the space of design or strategy or evaluations, OD, all of those, the normal, consulting in the social sector, in CSR and social sector space. At CSEP, at the Center for Social and Economic Progress, that's a think tank, and the work that I'm involved in there is more looking at what kinds of shifts have occurred in the social space because of the entry of the corporates in the last 5 to 10 years and other kinds of shifts that are happening, particularly in the areas of impact and governance. So both these are different kinds of engagements, and both are things that I now enjoy, which gives me, I'm not in the thick of action, which I am very happy about after having been in the thick of action for 30, 35 years. I'm now happy to be in the role of, letting others do the action. But if I can provide advice and perspective, that's what I'm happy about. So that's the kind of work that I now do, Harsha.
Wonderful, ma'am. Now, IICSR is training, research, and development institution in CSR and sustainability. In the current times, after the CSR has been mandated, we have lack of knowledge or short of knowledge in the domain. So what kind of courses do you think that we should run for the existing CSR practitioners and for the upcoming generation who would like to join the course?
That's an important question, Harsha. Yeah, and I agree. But I know already you are doing some very, very interesting courses you are offering, and I'm sure you'll continue to offer them more. Maybe I will only say one thing, Harsha. See, this is an evolving space. Huh? Corporate social responsibility, sustainability is something that has now got center stage. Huh? And things are happening, but it's an evolving space, and therefore it's an exciting space, and it could go in any direction. So the theory also has to be developed, the practice also has to be developed. So whatever the courses that you run, whatever the kind of programs that you offer, my suggestion would be, Harsha, that you should infuse your participants in these programs with the idea that they have to go out and build knowledge. Not with they shouldn't, once they have done your course, they shouldn't feel, okay, now I have, kind of memorized 5 things, and in whatever situation I will go, I will apply either point number 1 or point number 3 or point number 4. So I'm saying most of us in our arsenal, we don't have the full solutions. So if you can convey to your participants that you are sharing with them the knowledge that exists as of now, but they must become participants in creating the knowledge and building this space. And hence you are looking for people who will think on their own, or at least you want to trigger that process of thinking for themselves into the participants. So that's what I would say, Harsha, that whatever the people that come to you, whatever if you can trigger that thinking and questioning, and like they say, they will be in this world of constant praxis, in action and reflection. So they have to keep going between action and reflection, and prepare them for doing that. If you prepare them for doing that, your students, your participants will really make a mark for themselves. I can't hear you, Harsha.
On this note, we have few panelists with us. In case if anyone wants to ask their questions, please feel free. Raise your hand, switch on your camera and mic and ask. Mr. Mustafa.
Thank you. The question I have for Neelima who I know for a long time, is this: in the present arena where you mentioned corporates have come in and there is work going on, would you say that the work and scope of work in the social area, has it expanded, or have corporates coming in narrowed it?
So that's a brilliant question, Mustafa. And I would say, a bit sadly, I would say, Mustafa, that it's ending up narrowing it a little bit. At least so you will see the kind of work corporates, and again, I'm saying you can't fault them, huh? But that's why I had said corporate money is of a different flavor and different attributes to it. But corporate money, therefore, will look for initiatives where there are tangible results, where there are quick results, which means that certain agendas will not get as much attention. Um, Things where you can't measure change. If you're working on, for example, let's say, improving caste relations or improving gender relations, if you're working on economic empowerment of women, women's livelihoods, that's something that will catch the attention. But if you are just working on reducing domestic violence, for example, where it's hard to measure, or you are working on, improved gender relations or improved caste dynamics, those are not things that will. So in some ways, sadly, I think the arena is not big, and to the extent that arena is defined by money, only to that extent. The entire play field is not defined by money. There are still organizations who are continuing to do work which they feel most passionate about, and if they don't get corporate money, so be it. They are either raising money through other sources or doing the work whichever way they find, through their passion or through their own sacrifices and commitments. But if we only look through the lens of corporate money coming in CSR and philanthropy, I think sadly the play field is a rather limited play field.
Thank you, Mr. Mustafa. Highly appreciate the question you've asked. May I request Mr. Siddharth Daga to please switch on his camera and ask his set of questions?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
can
we
everyone
can
hear?
hear you.
Great. Thanks, ma'am. Neelima, ma'am, I think those were some very valid points. So just a short introduction. My name is Siddharth. We are a startup from IIT Madras. We make mobility assistive devices for physically challenged. I mean, this is the picture of what we make. It's basically a wheelchair, a manual wheelchair with a scooter clip-on for the wheelchair. So basically, anybody who's physically challenged or who is paralyzed waist down, they can attach this and then they can go to college, they can go to school, they can go to work. They don't need to depend on public transport or anyone else. So this is what we do. I'm an engineer myself and we are based out of Chennai. So my direct question would be, I wanted to know which, first of all, which firms are there who are actively working on disability, on mobility, employment for disabled people, because at the end, we look at this as a means for people to go outside, first of all, live life to the fullest, and then obviously get educated, get employed. So any suggestions on companies or corporates or even NGOs for that matter who are working in the disability space? And I would really love to just share our work with you over an email so that you also get to know what we are doing right now.
No, very good work that you're doing, Siddharth. Really nice. And where did you say you're based?
We are based in Chennai.
Chennai.
So we are all graduates of IIT Madras.
Yeah, so there are a lot of organizations and companies that are disability it's a niche area, but there are companies that are very much invested into this space. So maybe separate. I don't think, Siddharth, it would be appropriate for me to take names here of companies, but I can certainly, in Chennai only, there are people with whom I can connect you, and they can maybe advise you more in the disability space. There are some people who are working on disability in Chennai, and you could connect with them. Yes, but very, very nice work that you're doing, Sid.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
So I will connect you with ma'am over the email. Or ma'am, if you would like to share your email ID right now, we would be happy to.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So on this note, any final message to all of us, all the viewers who are watching this and who may watch it in recorded version?
No, thank you, Harsha. I'm not very good at giving these, nice bites and messages at the end. I think I think, like I said earlier, Harsha, I think it's a fascinating and most satisfying space in which to be. And I would really encourage more and more people to get into this work. That's all that I would say, Harsha. And thank you very much for inviting me.
It's an honor. May I request everyone to please switch on your camera? We can take a group picture. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mustafa. Thank you, Siddharth.